So, what if I told you that one of the most practical and honestly modern guides to self discipline and the inner workings of your own mind was written almost 350 years ago? It was by a Puritan thinker named John Owen. And today we're going to do a deep dive into his absolute masterclass on the psychology of temptation. So, here's the game plan. We're going to start with the problem Owen was seeing all around him. Then we'll break down his anatomy of how temptation actually works, see how it gets so powerful, and understand why our usual defenses totally crumble. And finally, we'll get to his practical two-part strategy and what he called the ultimate defense for building a truly resilient mind. All right, so picture this. It's 1658. The guy we're talking about, John Owen, is a major Puritan leader, and he's looking at his community. These are people who went through unbelievable hardship, right? Persecution, struggle. But now things are pretty good. They've got some power, some prosperity. And right there, in all that comfort, Owen starts to see a huge crisis brewing. And here's the fascinating thing Owen noticed. He believed that comfort was actually making his people weak. The very success they'd fought so hard for was now their biggest vulnerability. They were getting complacent, forgetting all the discipline that made them who they were. And in his eyes, they were becoming really easy targets for temptation. So what does he do? He basically decides to write a field manual for the mind. And his analysis starts with defining the enemy with this incredible, razor-sharp precision, temptation itself. Now, Owen's core idea is that temptation on its own isn't actually evil. He sees it more as a neutral test, a moment of trial. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? A knife can feed you, or it can kill you. It's all about how you handle it. If you handle it right, it makes you stronger, like exercise. But if you handle it poorly, well, it can destroy you. The choice, he says, is all in how you engage with it. And that leads us to what is honestly probably his most crucial distinction. On the left, you've got being tempted. Owen says, look, this is just going to happen. It's part of life. It's like a knock at the door. But the real danger, over on the right, is what he calls entering into temptation. See the difference? It goes from a passive state to an active process. It moves from an external knock to an internal negotiation. This right here is the key takeaway. The danger isn't the knock. You're still free when you hear the knock. The danger starts the second you open that door and start a conversation. When your mind starts to reason with the idea, to debate it, to entertain it, what Owen calls parlaying with the heart. That's it. That's the moment you've crossed the line and stepped right into the trap. So how does this whole process escalate? Owen argues that these temptations, they don't just show up fully formed and all-powerful. No, they grow. They build momentum until they reach this point he dramatically calls their hour of power, that moment where they feel almost impossible to resist. But how does that actually happen? How does some quiet little thought turn into this overwhelming compulsion that you just can't shake? Well, Owen breaks it down into a really clear four-stage process. Okay, so it starts with what he calls long solicitation, which basically means we just keep thinking about it. We let the idea live rent-free in our heads, and from there, it breeds familiarity. The thing that used to be shocking, now it just feels kind of normal. The internal alarm bells just stop ringing. Then, stage 3. We see other people doing it. This creates a precedent, and it just lowers our own guard. And finally, boom, the perfect opportunity strikes. And because all that internal groundwork has already been laid, the temptation now has its hour of power. So if temptation has all this power, what about our defenses? Surely we have safeguards in place, right? Well, Owen's argument is that the very things we trust the most to protect us are often the first things to completely fall apart. Think about it. We often rely on our fear of shame or wanting a good reputation or just wanting to keep a clear conscience. We tell ourselves, oh, I'd never do that, what would people think, or I just couldn't live with myself. But according to Owen, leaning on those defenses, it's like building a dam out of sand. It just won't hold. And this quote, wow, it gets right to the heart of why those defenses fail. It's because the very thing we're trusting to be the guard, our own heart, our own mind, is fundamentally untrustworthy when the pressure is on. Owen's psychology here is pretty stark. He's saying that when a temptation hits that hour of power, our mind becomes a master of rationalization. It'll invent excuses, it'll minimize the consequences, it'll find 1,000 little ways to betray our own best intentions. The guard essentially just opens the gate for the enemy. So, if we can't trust our own hearts, then what's the solution? Are we just doomed? No. Owen lays out a two-part mandate, a really practical strategy for building a defense system that doesn't rely on our own flawed logic. He calls it watch and pray. Now, watching isn't just passively sitting around. For Owen, it is a super proactive four-part strategy. First, you have to know yourself, your specific weaknesses, your triggers. Second, you actively manage your environment to avoid those triggers. Third, be vigilant. Learn to spot that very first subtle knock at the door. And finally, and this part is so crucial, you have to act decisively. You need the temptation at the door with a firm no, not a debate. Just shut the door. The second part, praying, is really about this radical admission that your own willpower is just not enough. It's about acknowledging your limits and actively looking for strength from a source outside of yourself. And Owen is really clear on this. It has to be a consistent, daily habit, not just a panic button you hit when things get bad. But then, beyond these specific actions, Owen proposes an ultimate defense, a way of being that creates a kind of built-in immunity to temptation. He calls it keeping the word of Christ's patience. Now, in more modern language, you can think of this as consciously and consistently living your life based on a core set of positive values. When your life is just saturated with principles like mercy and holiness and liberty, it fundamentally changes your inner landscape. And this constant practice, it doesn't just give you tools to fight temptation. It actually changes the battlefield itself. It transforms your heart from this open, vulnerable field into a truly defended place. It creates what he calls a garrison. The defenses are already built in. The soldiers are already on the walls. Temptations might still come knocking, but they find no way in. There's no sympathetic traitor inside who's going to open the gate for them. And this leaves us with a pretty fascinating question, doesn't it? I mean, Owen was writing about the temptations of prosperity and politics back in the 17th century. But in our world, a world of constant digital notifications, endless streams of information, and algorithm-driven desires, how might this ancient system for knowing yourself, for managing your environment, and for building an inner garrison be more relevant than it's ever been?